Fantastic. I believe I'm sharing my screen now. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's a series of machines that kill you. And then I'm going to completely screw it up. Hang on. Right. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Let's get here. I am currently moving house. I've moved house from London up to Sheffield. And so I'm on a friend's computer, and I've had to use Pastebin to get the Zoom links over to myself. There's no real login or anything, so I'm being as sensible as I can. But here we are. Hello, hi everyone. My name is Grant Howitt, and I was asked by the good people at Waldritter to put together to give some talks, and I'm giving a talk tomorrow about representing unpleasant things in role-playing games. But today, as they specifically asked me to talk about my work, I've decided to talk about all of my work. So, strap in, because we've got about 40 minutes of this, maybe a little bit shorter, so there'll be some room for questions. But before we start, I should explain who I am if you don't know. My name is Grant Howitt. I do role-playing games for a living. I wrote Spire and Heart. Those are the two sort of best-known ones. But I also wrote Honey Heist, which is a game about playing a criminal bear, which has been shamefully popular. I am one of the, I guess I can say I'm one of the more prominent role-playing game designers in the UK. And while this doesn't talk about the industry at all, I guess I'm perhaps worth listening to. Before we go on with this, there's going to be some brief content warnings for the speech, for the presentation. Depression and mental health in general. There'll be some suicide. There'll be mention of suicidal ideation, as you can possibly guess from the title. I don't know if you can see me even. Anyway, can you see me? Thumbs up. Great. Okay. Cool. And also there'll be some swearing. So that'll be in English, so it's fine. So let's go. First off, Grant Howitt, 14 years old. Let's talk briefly about how I got into role-playing games. I grew up in the middle of nowhere in the countryside. I was a difficult young child, difficult boy, and I didn't have much in the way of friends. And I was at Games Day 2000. Games Day is Games Workshop's a sort of open day, they're kind of their big event. And I saw some people playing a game of Sabbat. And Sabbat is like Vampire the Masquerade, but edgy. And it's already pretty edgy. So it gives you an idea of what we're dealing with here. But I saw them play it, and it was completely unfocused. It was, I think, from any measure of good GMing, terrible. But everyone seemed to have a good time. And I'd never seen a role-playing game before. I never knew that you could have something. The only thing I knew was role-playing game, was Warhammer. And so I thought you had to have, all the different toys and models. You had to paint your tanks and what have you, where in fact you can just say, what if there was a tank? What if there was a war? And I realized that there was something fascinating and exciting here. I couldn't quite understand what it was I wanted out of it, but I knew I wanted it. At 15, the slide mentioned I was horny. I was nervous about talking to people, especially girls, but just people in general. I didn't understand them. I didn't know what they wanted, and I didn't know what they wanted from me. And I realized that maybe role-playing games could provide me with a series of rules for talking to people. I could be in charge. I could present the role-playing game. I could present the rules. I could dictate what was going on, and then I would feel comfortable in social situations. Now, unfortunately, I lived in the middle of nowhere. I lived in Portugal when I was growing up, and there wasn't a lot of English language role-playing games, or indeed Portuguese language role-playing games knocking around in the Algarve. So what I did was I would go online. It was a website called John Kim's Free RPG repository or something, and there were thousands of free role-playing games. And what I would do, I would dial up onto the internet, download them into rich text files, and then read them. And these were the absolute worst. This was the worst way to learn how to do role-playing games. It was like trying to retro-engineer how to learn sex from finding pornography in the woods. It was a complete nightmare. But I downloaded a load of things and I read them and I loved them. And my favorite one was called Zaibatsu. Zaibatsu was the first game I ever ran. The first game I ever hacked. Zaibatsu is a Gibson-esque cyberpunk, post-Gibson cyberpunk, I believe, game. It was on an Angel Fire website, which I believe has been taken down. It used a very simple system. And halfway through the first time I was running it, I decided that I was bored of this. I didn't like the way it was doing rules, so I invented cool points. And cool points I gave the players some points, and when they wanted to do something cool, they spent the cool points. And I like to think that my designers progressed a little bit since then, but not a great deal. I realized there was something ineffable which I wanted to express. I wanted people to have a good time with me, and because of things I did, which led to Uncle Grant's comedy role-playing game. Now, this is the first thing I ever wrote in the realm of role-playing games. It wasn't a choose your own adventure. I wrote in my school book when I was 13. And all the art was screenshots in Grand Theft Auto 3. There was a lot of rules for specifically stealing cars. There were rules for, there's a lot of marijuana use. I was obsessed with using marijuana. I hadn't really smoked any, but I was very excited to have the possibility of that. So I had full rules for that. And every lunchtime for a few weeks, maybe for a month, I would set up a little table in the playground and my friends would come, or some people who weren't strictly my friends but wanted to play, and we would share this together. We would, I came up with a very straightforward, generic role-playing game system, although again, it did focus heavily on stealing cars. And the plot was that there were terrorists in the school and that we had to defend the school from the terrorists. And it was very silly. I didn't want to take it seriously. I didn't want people to find out that I liked this stuff. I also wrote an entirely unreleased game called War on Darkness. You won't find this anywhere. I can't find this anywhere. I think my mum might have it somewhere. But this is when I was 15 years old, and my mum took an occult dictionary off me. It was £2.50 from this little cheap bookshop in town. And I bought a dictionary of the occult, and it was all, like satires and spells and demons and what have you. And Mum took it off me because she thought it was spooky. And I decided at that point I wanted to immerse myself in the occult as much as I could. Not in a sort of, oh, I believe magic is real way, but in a way that I wished magic was real. God, it would be great. God, it'd be great if it was easy, if there was something straightforward, if it could matter, if I could pluck at the skein of reality and twist it in a way I understood. What if magic was real? That again runs through all of my games. I had only read World of Darkness books at this point. I'd managed to import a couple. And so I wrote a bad copy of World of Darkness with heavy Christian overtones, and it never got released. I had different rules for being Uriel and being Michael. However, then I went to university. And I met some other nerds. Now, when I say other nerds, I don't mean me, of course. I'm cool as a cucumber. I'm normal, or at least weird in an interesting way. Role-playing games are for nerds. But I met some friends. I met some very good friends at university, and we started playing role-playing games together. And I still decided that I wanted to write them. I wanted to make them. They weren't doing the right thing for me. Dungeons and Dragons was too rulesy, too much measuring of movement. World of Darkness had too many different side bits you could go down, and it was too woolly. Nothing was really scratching my itch. So I wrote a game called Arbitrary. Again, now this one was released, but it's been taken down now, thankfully. Arbitrary was an attempt to make a genre-free role-playing game, and my overall thoughts were settings are for nerds, classes are for nerds, rules are for nerds, honestly, and what the fuck is a D8? I used D6s all the way through. I had a very simple system, which was you ranked your score from 1 to 5, and then you rolled under it on a D6. And that was, I think, I'm going to say the first 6 years of my game design career, the only system I used when it came to it. It was charmless. It was not at all interesting. It was not special. There was a paragraph in the book saying, like, oh, role-playing games have to be about wizards and vampires and dwarves and goblins. What if we had a role-playing game about real stuff, you know, like action films? It's terrible. The final boss was a helicopter in the adventure I did. I wrote an unnamed cyberpunk project because I wanted to do the same, because I wanted to explore that a bit, use exactly the same system. I never even wrote it down on the computer, but speaking to Chris Taylor, my erstwhile ally and confidant and business partner, I remember talking through the cyberpunk rules with him and justifying in reality how if you fire 2 guns, it should do more damage than firing 1 gun because there's 2 guns. I didn't understand that games could encourage behavior. I didn't understand that you could represent things other than reality. And so I was attempting to justify people firing 2 guns by saying it must be better than 1 gun. It wasn't very good, but I'm starting to learn a bit more as we go along. And then enter Zombie LARP. So Zombie LARP was one of the most successful things we did before we became a company. Zombie LARP was, as you can probably guess from the title, a LARP about zombies. We had to set up a fairly complex political campaign to make it work. I became president of the Game Society. Chris became games officer of the Game Society. And on the university's single 24-hour role-playing game event, we managed to take it over for 12 hours, a converted sports hall, and fill it full of zombies. We had Nerf guns, we had foam weapons, and we had a player life expectancy of about 7 minutes. Sorry, character life expectancy of about 7 minutes. The players weren't dying. And we thought that LARPs were for nerds. Being in character was for nerds. And you can literally spend half an hour in character in a LARP, if not more. Settings are for nerds. So none of that. It was all Nerf guns. It was all running. It was all screaming. It was physical. It was closer to a live game than a live action role-playing game. And because we wrote it opposed to everything that we thought was boring about LARP, whether or not it was good, it was giving people something they didn't have elsewhere, and it did quite well. Well, I'll talk a bit more about it as we go on, because we would carry on developing it for years. Shamefully, at role-playing at university, I also wrote Drunken Bear Fighter. Drunken Bear Fighter is still available online, and I've tried to take it down, but people keep putting it back up. So I just decided to host it and charge money for it. There was an hour-long. There was a challenge on a website to write a role-playing game, which was 1 page in 1 hour. And I sat down, came home from university one day in the 3rd year, and thought, yeah, fuck it, drunken bears. Yeah, okay, cool. You're fighting drunken bears in the Russian underground. Go. You're part of the Russian Drunken Bear Fighting Organization, or RUDBIFO. And it did quite well. It got picked up. People played it on 4chan. I think someone hacked it to be an inflation fetish game, which I have as a mark of real pride. I don't want to read the rules, but I'm glad that they took that. And the reason why it was popular, the reason why people latched onto it, because it had a sell. If you look at my much later work, you can see how everything I put out now has a sell. It has a concept which you can explain quickly to someone. Of course, it would take me about 12 years to realize that. So I learned absolutely nothing from Drunken Bear Fighter. Anyway, then I left university. Terrible plan leaving university. I can't recommend it, especially in 2008 with a creative writing degree. Because the year before, I was supposed to have a job. I was supposed to leave and walk into a writing job. But 2008 meant that my experience from Britain, at least, was that rather than expanding outwards, we started going inwards. We stopped making new things. We stopped taking risks, and everything became very, very staid and what's the word? Boring, unexciting. everyone was doing basic jobs they didn't like. And my job I didn't like was working in pensions. I don't have a head for numbers, and my bosses all realized this. And so I was perpetually handed around between teams as a sort of bargaining chip. Before people worked out that I brought down office morale significantly through my frequent complaining, and I could see no way out of this. I was sold a bright future, and it wasn't there when I turned up. There was no prospects for me in my town. There was no jobs which tied into the things I was fascinated about, and I couldn't see a way to make my own job I was fascinated about, because I was 21 years old and I'm not an entrepreneur. So I became increasingly desperate to die. This is the start of the suicidal ideation bit, by the way. I would fantasize about death sitting in my workplace. Yeah, I would go into the office every day and I would answer the phone, and my job was to tell confused 65-year-olds why they didn't have any money anymore because we invested badly in the 80s before I was born. It was a terrible job, soul destroying. And I would sit and think, oh, what if I could destroy myself in this office? What if I could what if I could make a mark and scar these people and wake them up with my death? But instead of that, I carried on doing Zombie Lab. Now, Zombie Lab version 2. We had 5 classes, and 2 of them did things when they died. There was a priest that exploded. There was a test subject who could scream and scream, and as long as they were screaming, they didn't take damage. But then when they stopped screaming, they dropped to 0 hit points. We wanted to write a game about dying, or I did anyway. I didn't realize that's what I was doing, and we came up with a phrase. That's very switch. But the one thing which we told people, which was very important, was Zombie Lab isn't about winning; it's about having a good death. And I want to stress as well: you could win Zombie Lab. It was a game. It's not like a LARP for nerds or anything. You could escape. You could get the objectives and get out and hit the zombies and do it properly. But we created a machine that gave you that killed you. You came to a converted sports hall in the middle of the night in Norwich, and about 10 people dressed as zombies, which amounted to some fake blood smeared over their face, tore you to shreds in a back room, and you got to feel that. But we moved away from the idea of having it as a simple horror game and wanted to come into the idea of where we had that exploding priest, where we had that test subject who could scream so they didn't take damage. What we wanted to do was create a game where you could sacrifice yourself. And what if your sacrifice meant something? What if it was powerful? What if it was noble? What if it was exciting? What if it was for a greater good? But remember, it's just a game. You can win, you know? You can still win. Other things I wrote directly after leaving university are Fallen, a game in which I think it's online somewhere. You could probably track it down. Fallen is a game where you play gods and you make a beautiful kingdom which you rule over. You have your cults and you have your nations and your wonders, and then someone else comes along and steals it and ruins it and breaks it, and you have to fight to take control of whatever little is left. I also wrote an unreleased game called Bound, a game where you make deals with demons to cast spells and prosper and survive. You know, a bit like getting a job, I now realize. It had 100 different sections around the character sheet for sections of your soul that you could sell off, which is how I felt every day. And much like War on Darkness, it was a World of Darkness ripoff with heavy Christian overtones, and it's similarly unreleased. So I was having a hard time with things. I wasn't very happy at all. I moved to London. I moved with my partner, Maz Hamilton. Maz Hamilton, who is also 1/3 of Rowan, Rook and Decker. I married them because I was very fond of them. Married them at the age of 23. I moved to London and I was working full-time for a men's magazine. I'm not super proud of what I did. I wrote a lot of articles about girls, and girls constituted any woman attractive enough to have her picture taken at an event. And so I would have to come up with 1,000 words a day about 4 different women. And it was complete cock. It was absolute nonsense. And I had no oversight. I was throwing myself into the job. I was drinking too much. I was very occasionally being allowed to go out on press trips because I used to do games journalism as well. And I would drink myself into a stupor. I would steal as much free wine as I could because I was really struggling to get on with the day. I was really struggling to relax and to engage myself. And this is when I wrote Goblin Quest. Goblin Quest would go on to be the first game which we published several years later, but this is when I wrote it. And in Goblin Quest, you play 5 goblins and you die. You play 5 goblins in sequence, not in parallel. And the deal is, the more you have a character sheet, which you've drawn your goblins on, and it's kind of for kids. It is for kids. The book's expressed it for kids. You draw your 5 goblins on there. And then you roll a dice for every element of the character sheet you tag, and the more dice you roll, the more likely you are to succeed and die. And your quest, the quest in the title is you play goblins who are only going to live for a week. They're like mayflies, and so you are trying to do something noble, like make a sandwich or put on a party, or learn to play the guitar, or slay a dragon, whatever, probably just a dog, which you think is a dragon. Again, what if your death could be in the service of something noble? What if your death could further something? What if you could spend the only thing you have which is yours, and which is deep within you, the sacred spark of your life? What if you could fire that off and have it do something? But also it's a joke, don't worry, because you're just making a sandwich, so it's fine. It's not serious. You mustn't take me seriously, you understand? This is all very silly. Role-playing games are for nerds, and I'm not one of them. Zombieland came to a close. It came to a peak. We ran it at a shopping mall in Reading. It was an abandoned shopping mall called Friars Walk. It was an absolutely astonishing 4-story structure with a play area, with a ball pit, with vast basements, with empty shops and mobile escalators and huge glass-fronted windows. And a lot of people being given this opportunity, being given a larger space and the challenge to run a game for more people, perhaps for some more money, would have made a game which lasts longer. But no, we killed you more. Rather than dying once, you died 3 times. And the 4th time you started off as a zombie, so you were already dead. In fact, one of those deaths, we ran a Christmas themed event. I think it was called Zombie Love, You'd Better Watch Out. And you got a Christmas card, and it had special rules for your death on a run. Again, you weren't really supposed to make it out. We had about a 3% survival rate. But when we were running it in the sports hall, we tried to engineer your death. We tried to give you a death which was interesting. We tried to make it fair, if not fair, interesting. And at the mall, it was brutal, uncaring. It was simulation style. We had 120 zombies. We couldn't control them all. So you earned that death, and it was yours. And it's brutal and uncaring and simulation style, but also it happens out of sight of the GMs. It happens in a back room somewhere. Very few people die in open thoroughfares in Zombieland. They would always run into a room which they couldn't escape from and run out of ammunition and die. And it was intimate, and it mattered, and it was yours. So I'm writing games about, effectively, where I and my friends get the chance to die over and over and over. And then I moved to Australia. Australia is magic. Can't recommend it enough. I was happy there. The sun shone. There were dinosaur-sounding birds screeching through the air and swarms of thousands of bats at night. Everyone in Sydney is clean-limbed and beautiful and tan, that I'm scraping around like some sort of golem creature. But I got on with people, I made friends, I connected, and I started to, and also, thankfully, because I moved to Australia with my partner's work again, I couldn't legally work over there. I wasn't allowed to, but we had enough money coming in, I didn't have to. So I was taking care of the house and running things while Maz did the difficult job of making the Guardian work in Australia. I wrote a lot of good stuff in Sydney. I wrote a game called Warrior Poet, where you write competitive haikus to fight against each other, which is a great idea for a role-playing game, but not a good way to write haikus. I wrote One Last Job, a game where you give up control of your character. You give up not control, you give up how your character is made to every other player, and it happens live during the session. I wrote Havoc Brigade, which is a big, fun, silly dickabout where you play orcs doing an infiltration mission, and you can see so much of its influence in my later work, like Honey Heist, Goat Crashers, Crash Pandas, any sort of these animal-themed games where you play agents of chaos. Pardon me. I wrote Spirits Walk. Spirits Walk was a live action theatre. It took place on the streets of Melbourne, and the story we had was once a year the spirits of Melbourne awake, and you can contact them and draw charms and power from them and walk with the soul of the city. And it was all about social taboos. We had people singing in public while a masked man played a saxophone on a stage. We had people dancing with strangers with MP3 players in, and the MP3 players were giving them different information. We had people writing down their secrets, and then these secrets were anonymously carried on giant banners while people marched around. It was powerful and beautiful and amazing. I wrote an unpublished novel. You will not be surprised to hear it was a World of Darkness ripoff with heavy Christian overtones. It's called God in the Attic. It's 100,000 words long, and it's about two wizards punching an ersatz Jesus in the face. It's quite good. I sent it to one publisher. They said no, and I immediately moved on. Similarly, when I was in Australia, when I was challenging, what I found challenging in Australia was I started to get itchy around the idea of taking myself seriously. All the things I mentioned to you just then, all these things I'm really proud of, I described as silly little games. I think I described them as quick and dirty, or silly little games. I wasn't a nerd. I wasn't into, big rule books about or different weapons tables and rules for stairs and swimming rules. None of that. No. I'm not doing this seriously. Nor am I an artist either. This is all at arm's reach. This is all whatever. To prove a point, Maz set up GrantCon, and GrantCon is one of the proudest things that's ever happened to me in my life. It was a surprise, but GrantCon was an event run in 2015 where all the games were my games. It was a convention at our local gaming club, and I turned up there at 10:30 on a Saturday morning without realizing to a spray painted banner saying GrantCon, and there were 3 tables of 6 people playing all my games, some of whom I didn't know. There was one French guy who showed up who was really quite confused about what was going on, but all my friends were there, and I'd made so much, I built so much, and it was valuable. People were playing, they were playing Honey Heist. No, they weren't playing Honey Heist. They were playing Fallen. They were playing Dr. Magnahan's, a drinking game, but we played it with a world map. They were playing a game called Gunman of the Apocalypse, a name I stole from Red Dwarf. They were playing all sorts of things, and I got to play in those. And it didn't sink in. It didn't sink in that I was making serious art. I wrote Paranoia while I was in Australia. And Paranoia is a game where you play 6 clones in sequence, not in parallel, who die pretty much regardless of your actions. And just as an aside, I never liked Paranoia. I loved the setting. I thought the setting was good, but I thought the systems in place were uninteresting and challenging. And I thought that the point of playing a role-playing game where the rules were bad on purpose was a fine satire, but I had to play it. And I thought that wasn't optimal. So what I did with Paul Dean and James Wallace, we went through and I attempted to make a version of Paranoia that was thoughtful, innovative, funny, and crucially, a fairer, more egalitarian experience between players. I wanted to keep the animosity between characters high and the animosity between players low. And no one played it. No one liked it. Everyone disliked that game. It was, should have just written 300 pages of jokes and sold that instead, because what they wanted was the same thing they've always wanted. And I have a lot of theories about why our edition of Paranoid didn't really work. And I think it's because we made it much less sexy. I think it's always kind of been about kink, and you kind of want to go along and have the GM treat you real mean and push you over and tell you you're a little bitch, and then, you know, walk away from that at the end of the day. But that's a different talk entirely. Unfortunately, I moved to New York. New York is awful. I hated it there. I was tremendously depressed. The most depressed I've ever been in my life. I could barely claw my way out of bed. I was the desire to destroy myself was so loud I could barely hear anything. It was like someone throwing a load of pans into a sink in my brain all the time. And so, in an effort to stay sane, I also know Chris, who I developed Zombie Lark with before, and who we'd been like we're very good friends. We've been best friends since 2006 or so. He just got divorced. He was living with his parents in the middle of nowhere, and he was also going mad. And so we decided we'd write a game. We decided that we'd write a game to stop ourselves from going absolutely bananas. And this game was Unbound. It didn't work. We both went absolutely bananas. But one of the things which I noticed, Unbound was a generic rules light role-playing game. It was intended to make cinematic play. And in fact, I went through the game and cut out all the setting with a scalpel, just in case we left some setting in there. Because I was terrified that I was going to bore people by telling them about my imaginary wizards. I was bothering them and tugging on their coattails and saying, excuse me, sir, excuse me, miss, do you want to hear a story about a goblin I thought of? And I thought people would be so boring. I thought people were just reading my work out of kindness. Unbound didn't do terribly well because you can't sell generic role-playing games. And then, at 30 years old, I went to Costa Rica. So there's a retreat called there's a creatives retreat called /Story. I applied and I was lucky enough to be accepted. And this was an event where people were teamed up to speak to each other and learn from one another from different disciplines. And everyone was so earnest and keen, and they were making things from a position of love. They were like, why do we make art? Oh, I do it because I love my audience and I want to share that love with them. And it came around to me and I said, I'm doing it because I have a howling void in my chest that I have to fill with praise from anyone, especially if they're attractive. That would be great. But I don't feel what you feel. I was cynical. I was distant. I thought these people were just telling people about their imaginary wizards. And then I got so high I couldn't tie my shoelaces. We went to a mysterious jungle event in the woods. I threw a list of my fears overarm into a roaring fire in the middle of nowhere in July heat in Costa Rica. Something changed in me that night, and I'm ashamed to admit it, because I went into that feeling cynical and distant and proud of how disconnected I was. And then I came back feeling things. So I wrote Spire. Spire is a game about my imaginary wizards. Spire is a game about all the ideas I've had. And Chris, I should note as well, Chris is asleep in the room over there. But he assumed from now on, if I've mentioned anything, also Chris was there. I'd never written a game about anything before, and Spire was about something. I wrote it in 2016, which was the year that Brexit happened, or the year that we voted for Brexit. And I woke up one morning and I found out that half my countrymen are deluded jingoist shitheels, and I had to share England with them, share the UK with them. Speaking as a left-wing person under the age of 40 in the UK, every election I voted in, my party lost I've had no good results in engaging with government. And the cap of it was one of the few things we had going for us was that we were in the EU, and then that was removed. And what if we could just kill politicians to solve problems? What if we could grab a gun? What if magic was real and I could use it? What if I could use it to save the world? And what if our problems killed us? Not just, you know, oh, they kill you slowly and you die earlier, or like, oh, well, a lot of old people are going to die because heating's too expensive to buy. No. Me, right now, 20-something, furious. No, sorry, 30-something, furious, angry. What if it could kill me the way I wanted it to kill? What if I could kill it the way I wanted to kill it? There is obviously there's a danger in doing this, and that it's possibly a meaningless catharsis, and maybe we should just do some revolution instead of pretending to do revolution from a position of immense privilege. A game where we were, you know, Spire is popular, but it gives privileged people a chance to play it being unprivileged, and the safety barriers are very much in place. But I think that's a different talk entirely. Similarly, this time, sprung on by this passion, sprung on by this enthusiasm, I started writing one-page games. And these one-page games, such as Honey Heist, some of them were very popular. Some of them were less popular. But every single one let me try out a new idea, let me come up with something, let me keep my hand in, let me keep experimenting and also engaging with the audience. Honey Heist also crucially replaced Drunken Bear Fighter as my most popular game about bears, which I'm really glad about because it's much better. And I was releasing these for money to people who cared. I was making money from my Patreon. Spire was doing well. I was happy, right? Absolutely not. No. I was still hugely unhappy. I just written a book. I took some drugs in Costa Rica. That's not enough. That's not enough to do anything. I was still desperately sad. I'd learned to get people to take me seriously. Well, I could take myself seriously, but there was still this gap in me where the spark of life was supposed to live. So I wrote Heart. And Heart, the City Beneath started off as an experiment in dungeon crawling. Could we take the ideas behind Spire and apply them to something more traditional, less urban? Could we do an OSR style experience? And it isn't OSR, we've moved on from that, we've developed, but there are 21 top level abilities in Heart, and 21 of them, there are 21 top level abilities, and 20 of them kill the user when they're activated. They do things like you burst into light and a primeval heaven burrows up from the ground underneath you. You can become a red wet angel of meat and destroy a city. You can give yourself over to an ancient order of protectors. You can summon the one functional train and have it run over you and anything that's standing near you. And they're big, they're exciting. I mean, the other thing about Heart is that it's quite easy to die if you want to. But if you don't want to die, you don't have to. The only time a character dies is when they choose that high level ability, or if they agree to do it with the GM. So they can have the worst day of their lives. They can have punishments laid upon them all day. But they only die when it's their choice. And if you see your story through to the end, it's going to kill you. At this point, I'm barely cogent. I'm barely awake. My world is a haze of marijuana smoke and whiskey. I am sad and distant and far away. I gave up pretty much all of my friends. I stopped engaging with people. And Heart is a game about dying. And Heart is a game about a death which isn't funny or good or intimate or meaningful, but big, huge. It scars the world. It changes it forever. And every time every time that I wrote one of these abilities, every time that we wrote some high level, some critical fallout which kills you, I died in my mind. And I got to experience these 1,000 deaths. And I got to say, hey, come over here. Take my hand and die with me 1,000 times, just to see if we can find the right one. And the kicker is that I feel that all role-playing games are therapy. And I think that everything we do is a kind of therapy, unless it's a kind of harm. But all art is us exploring these things. And it wasn't role-playing games, which would fix me, which would make me work. No, it was therapy. I actually got therapy. And I stuck with it. I spent quite a lot of money on it. And it took a year and a half. And I got better. And when I was better, and only when I was better, I wrote a game about depression. I'd never written a game about depression. I've written plenty of games about killing myself, however abstracted that was. And I wrote a game about depression. It was called Fetch. And it was different from every other role-playing game I've written. It was a solo journaling game, which I don't do. It had themes of self-destruction, suicide, violence, isolation, self-mutilation. And it is a game where you wake up one day and realize that you are a construct, you are a changeling, which the fairies have placed in the world, and you're not real, but you found a way back to the fairy kingdom, and you're going to kill every single one of them for daring to make you. And then you're going to die. And it was on the other side of it. It was from a distance that I could see how strange and profound and fascinating suicidal ideation was. Because when I was in it, it made sense. It made absolute perfect sense. And the thought of wanting to live was silly, strange. And so I was able to access that and write it down. And on the back page of Fetch, the rules go that if you want to do this journaling game, you have to turn the page over first. You have to write a phrase on the back of the page over and over and over until it's full and until your hand hurts. And I wrote, I exist about 750 times on a piece of paper on the back of the game. And it was a mantra. It was a salute, an understanding of everything that my depression had taken from me and what it had done for me. And so now I'm 35 years old. I'm reaching the end of the talk. And you'd think that, given the heartfelt thing that I've just talked through, and all the fact that I no longer want to die and I can take myself seriously as an artist, you think that I'd be doing something different now, but absolutely not. No, we're writing a game called Hollows, and it's got more death in it than ever before. In fact, repeatedly dying is a tactic which works. But your options upon death are either come back swinging and kill the thing that killed you, or explode into a nightmarish other realm and make it everyone else's problem. You carry weapons made out of toxic masculinity. Your depression gives you superpowers. And the game is about kicking in the back door of someone's trauma and shooting their sadness in the head. So I'm doing all right, and I'm learning, and I'm getting there. And that's the end of my talk. So are there any questions which the audience would like to ask about my work? And do we have time to answer them? Because I know we started late.
We should do a little overtime because we started late.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay, thank you.
Apparently that was just such a good talk that everyone knew everything they need to know.
I have a question. You mentioned over and over again how you try to avoid what the stuff that you are doing actually means to other people for a very long part of your life. Has that changed nowadays? Are you finally able to confront the effect that you have on other people?
Yes, it was with Fetch, actually. I released Fetch, and someone got in touch and was like, "Grant, this is great. You need to put safety tools on this." And I'd realized that when I put it out, I knew that it was important. I knew I had to write it, but I didn't realize that it could hurt people. I didn't realize that it was potentially dangerous, and that's because I wasn't taking myself seriously. And so this very kind reader got in touch and said, right, okay, here's some safety tools. And then I basically just copied and pasted those onto my Patreon. And I think it was at that moment that I kind of realized that, yeah, actually, my work does have an impact, and it does have an impact on people who read it, and it can be positive or it can be negative, but there is something, there is a power to it, I suppose. There is a magic to it, and there's a responsibility to me to look after that. Jan, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to ask, so you're writing a lot of those one-page RPGs, and all of them that I read were quite awesome. And I just wanted to ask, do you have like a pool of ideas you work down, just trying to make a game out of them, or is it just like that's the next best thing that popped into my head, and I'm going to write a one-page RPG about it?
So it's generally when I used to have, because I don't have a regular role-playing group anymore, because we cancelled that when COVID came in, and I haven't started back up yet. But generally what would happen is my friends would say something stupid, and they'd be like, oh, that sounds like a one-page game. And I'd be like, nah, fuck off, hang on. And we'd sort of go back and forth a bit and kind of build on it. But generally what would happen is I would have I might say something daft on Twitter, and people might sort of come on board with it, which was nice, and have a chat. And so actually this idea has something, actually something. But generally, either I have an idea and it just sort of strikes me, I'm like, right, can I make this a game? And generally you can. The other great thing about it, because it's done through Patreon, it doesn't have to have a sell. It works sometimes, but I can just push a button and then I get money for it. And people seem to like them, which is good. And I work really hard on them as well. The less exciting version of that is it gets 2 weeks through the month, and I realize I have to publish something, and I have nothing, and I will just stare directly at a Google document for about 3 to 4 hours, and I'll swear into it a lot, and I'll think like, oh, what animal could do what sort of crime, and then sort of operate from there. It's not a perfect system, and I ran out of ideas. I did about 52. And then I ran out of ideas, and so I did a year of collaborations with other people, which was absolutely fantastic. I got to work with Chris McDowell, who's fantastic. I got to work with Alex Roberts and Slavia Nelson and Daniel Mallory, who is not a role-playing game designer. He used to write The Toast. I think he's basically one of our generation's greatest writers. And because he likes my Warhammer models, I got to write a book with him. So that was very exciting. Clemens.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the talk. And I think I finally understand why especially hard resonates so much for me. I did try it out once with a group of friends, and now I ask myself why it fell a bit flat. Maybe they were too happy or too content.
Oh yeah. Shouldn't play it with normal people.
Yeah, I realized that. Is there a way maybe to prime a group a bit to look into the themes of the game?
Yeah, absolutely. What they want to do around the age of 10, they want to get their heart broken. And be confused about women and men and their own sexuality and gender and profession and place in the world for about 20 or so years, and that's probably good. I think like on a more serious way, I think priming them in terms of this, like, this is an obsession that's going to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
As the first thing you say when you come in, and it's what is your story is going to be short and brilliant. What's it going to be like? What are you interested in exploring? And we have the method with the beats in Heart as well. So we, you know, you get to provide kind of information to the GM to help out. But I think sort of making it really clear that this is a game about dying in an exciting or ironic way.
Mm-hmm.
And also you get to be a cool wizard. I think that might help.
Yeah, definitely. Also the beats, and especially I think it's pretty brilliant as a book.
Thank you. I'm from Marvel Heroic Role Playing, a game which no one remembers but was very good. Nils.
Yeah. Yes. Regarding the amount of games that you've done till now, I wanted to ask if in which way your game making process is structured. So do you have a theme that you want to write about and then you make a game about it? Or are you making a game and you're surprised that it's about the same topic again? How do you approach it?
Generally, the way in which I work, I think I generally go themes first, and then try to come up with a mechanic which will express that theme. And I think perhaps broader than theme is I'll start off with the cell. So I'll start off with the idea of, let's say, so the cell for Heart is your tragic obsessives exploring a doomed, unreal dungeon, which will kill you. And taking from that, like, okay, well, like how can the mechanics skew towards this theme? How can we do that? But generally, the way that Chris and I write games, I can't recommend this. It's not efficient. But you write the first draft, then you don't play test it. You look at it and you realize, oh, actually, defense doesn't work. So you take out all of the rules and change all the dice types, and then you put in a new system, and you play through a little bit. And you're like, oh, well, we can't do this class now with this system. So you get rid of that. And what you do is you rewrite the Spire is the edition of Spire which is available for purchase is the 15th version of Spire. It went through, it was a card game for a while. We had a game based on D4s, I think. We had a 2D20 variant. The deal was that we just kept writing the game over and over. And what would occur was eventually you pull out the middle of the game enough, and the shell starts to aggregate around the outside. And this is only with Chris and I, and this is for our longer games. For our shorter games, I just sort of come up with some ideas and write them down, and it tends to go well or badly or whatever. But we form a shell, and then by the time you've done that about 6 or 7 times, again, not efficient. And my project manager doesn't like the fact that we work this way, but you know, I pay his bills, so that's fine. The shell forms, and then you can look at something. And so we're writing Hollows at the moment, which has gone through a lot of rewrites. I think this is the 9th version, which we're putting out in playtest, 10th. And you can look at the shell and go, right, this thing is Hollows. This thing isn't Hollows. The same way that we could hold up a picture and say, this is evocative of Spire, or this isn't evocative of Spire. And once Chris and I have that shared understanding, that's something which we can hopefully communicate through rules, and then other people can latch their own understanding onto that and can make their own spaces in the game. I think that what makes a brilliant game, what makes a successful game, is giving people the opportunity to form a community, and the way in which you can form a community is through shared touchstones. So the reason why Spire did better than Unbound is because in Spire you can say, right, this guy looks like a Knight of the North Docks, or you can say, okay, so we were breaking into the Silver Quarter and my Azurite had just found the idol passed out in a gutter. And you have these shared touchstones which you can describe with people, and if they've played Spire or read Spire, they can understand that. You can form a community, you can add to that, and it comes from that aggregation. I think we've got one last question from Dorian.
Yes, hi, thanks for the talk. And now I definitely want to try out Warrior Poet. And I want to ask you if you have some advices how to write good haikus for this game.
Um,
And of course, if you have one on your mind, it would be great to hear one.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow, great. Thanks, man. What a great finisher. It's very experimental, Warrior Poet. I playtested it once, which is more than I playtest my games these days, but I playtested it once and it generates things which are like weirdly evocative and weirdly heartbreaking. The deal with Warrior Poet is that you play a warrior poet. I will say as well, I wrote it a while ago now. I think it's nearly 10 years ago. No, 8 years ago. And I think some of the themes are a bit exoticized. I think it's a bit like, oh, isn't Japan interesting? Or isn't China interesting? And I think there's some stuff which I regret doing in that way. But systemically, it's still interesting. And the idea is you play these warrior poets and you will live for a year. That's the other thing. It is a game about dying. You will live for a year. And each of the seasons is a scene, is a poem for your character. And so it's about living beautifully. Matt, I should have mentioned it was a game about living beautifully and dying. I forgot about that. Thank you for bringing it up. The best advice I can give you is to go hard at it. So don't be vague. Don't try and leave yourself open to interpretation. Be evocative, be beautiful, be huge, and basically make other people's haikus force to fit yours. And if everyone does that, you're going to get this huge, chaotic, silly, big haiku, which is nonetheless impressive, because it's a game about casting spells and reshaping the world and dueling. And I think that the best way you're going to do that is by going at it hard. I don't have a haiku for you. I'm not a dancing monkey. I've already given you a 45-minute speech.
And sadly, we have to come to an end because we started late and other people are probably wanting to use this room by now.
Thank you for having me.